So thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to be here and to share some of the odd data tales that we've run into over the past few years. So I'll go ahead as we're learning the platform. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so speaking today will be Sophia Vargas, Maria Cruz, and myself, Amanda Casari. We're all on the same team at Google. And for those who it helps, you can find the slides and speaker notes for our talk today at bit.ly. That's bit.ly/DATATALES PYDATA-GLOBAL-2023. And we'll share those out on LinkedIn and social media channels that we're on later. So as I said earlier, Sophia, Maria, and I are all in the Google Open Source Programs office. Google's OSPO's mission is to bring all of the value of open source to Google and all of the resources of Google to open source. Our specific team in OSPO is known as the Open Source Contributor Experience Team, Context. That extra T at the end also means we sometimes get to say the context team, like ATM machine, which everybody loves. We're a group of folks who collectively pool our experience and skills in research data, developer relations, community development, education, user privacy, and compliance to improve the open source contributor and maintainer experience. And we frequently get asked lots of questions about open source that simply can't be answered based on pure experience or without in-depth analysis. A few years ago, we specifically spun up work streams focused solely on research to measure and model open source at the ecosystem level, as well as increasing program level data, metrics, and impact tracking for our team. Quite simply, our team is always looking for that magic spot of any research, which allows us to have better data and better models so that we can make better data-informed decisions. Really, we just want to know where we are so that we can work collectively in and with our communities to figure out where to go next. Like you, we didn't get here by magically knowing what problems to solve, having the perfect data, and always coming up with the right answer. As much as I would love very much for the straightforward map that you see here, it simply doesn't exist. Our team has a variety of backgrounds, interests, and experience that layer together to navigate the space collaboratively and creatively. And today, we would like to share some of those foundational tales and projects that shape our work and our view on how to successfully integrate data-centered projects as part of a larger team and vision. So kicking us off first is Sophia Vargas. Sophia, take it away.
Hello, everyone. As Amanda said, my name is Sophia Vargas. Next slide. I joined this team with a background in market research, consulting, and analytics, and I was a program manager working on research and analytical projects. At the center of all of these different roles has always been data, how to collect it, how to interpret it, how to explain it, and use it effectively to inform decision-making. And so in direct support of this team, as well as in other roles that I've had before. Next slide. In my role within the Context and Broader Open Source Programs Office, a team, as well as in the CHAOSS community externally, I think a lot about open source health and project metrics, how we define them, how we collect them, how we portray them, how we explain them to our stakeholders, and particularly how we use them to inform decision-making in and around our project communities. But in order to do that, we need to ensure that we understand, in fact, what the data is and is not, and how we can interpret what we see in the variety of metrics that we collect. Next slide. And at the center of this problem, especially for open source communities, is understanding what it means for humans, for the people, for our most valuable resource inside our communities. Many of these metrics around open source projects are centered on people. How many contributors we have, how many maintainers we have, what are the activities that they're doing, where are things slowing up, where are things building down, where do people need more help? But in order to try to generate metrics that answer those questions, we have to associate activity with people and assume that the things that we're looking at are actually being done by people. So can we do that? And to explore that question, next slide, I'm going to be looking at a bunch of GitHub logs. GitHub is a popular platform for a lot of open source projects to host their code bases and interact with the various contributor and user communities. It is not where all open source lives, and it does not capture all things that happen around open source. There are many contribution activities that do not happen on the GitHub platform. So it is not a comprehensive source, but it can be a useful tool for those that host their projects on GitHub. And as such, it becomes a valuable resource for open source activity measurement and metrics. To explore a particular problem, I'm going to be looking at data collected by the GitHub Archive project started by a Googler in 2011. This project contains a comprehensive export of the GitHub event stream, again, dated back to 2011. Note that in the sort of aggregate summary, I've put logged events with a star. This is because this project is not completely comprehensive. The number of activities logged has been decreasing over time as the platform has scaled and some of the logs are being dropped. So we know it's not a perfect source, but because of the historical records that we have, it can be a useful source to go dig in and understand historical trends and behaviors. For a sense of the pipeline that I've been working with, in this particular sample, we collected more than 1 million events logged on GitHub in 2022 by more than 20 million distinct actors. Note that if you're looking at the Octoverse published by GitHub once a year, they might quote a number like 94 million developers on GitHub. But these numbers often include private repositories in addition to public repositories, where in this particular example, we'll also be looking at public repositories hosted on GitHub. So as you can see on the GitHub platform, in addition to things like code changes, it also collects issues and comments around issues and comments around pull requests and comments around changes on the tool. So in addition to just code changes, you can have a little bit more information around all the activity happening around the code changes as well as on the broader platform. Next slide. And when we think about that question again of, are you human? For the most part, I'm thinking about automation and known bot actors. So to kind of bring you an estimate of the scale of actors on GitHub or potentially in your project, I ran a basic query trying to identify actor logins that are like BOT, so it has BOT somewhere in it. So yes, this is overestimating the number of bots. So we've rounded down, told you it's an estimate, but it's a starting point. And through this basic method, we found more than 40,000 actors that could be bots, representing about less than 1% of all actors on the platform in 2022. So you might think, okay, maybe not that huge of a deal. Next. But when we look at the impact of these less than 1% of all actors, they're actually generating up to 24% of all events logged on GitHub. Next. And if we look at the aggregate behavior over time, we can see that this is only growing and it's growing exponentially. And if you look at the bottom of this chart, you see push events and pull request events, which are the primary events triggered around code changes and proposed code changes. So if we're relying on platforms like GitHub to understand who is interacting with the code base and proposing changes, we realize that there could be a lot of bot activity happening in there depending on our project. Next slide, please. So for an example, how might bot actors or automation impact your metrics? We're going to take an example of pull requests. Pull requests, again, are a popular thing to look around for metrics: who's opening pull requests, who's closing pull requests, how quickly are pull requests getting reviews at closed and merged. And when we, again, consider bot actors, next, we estimate that bot actors are also interacting with pull request events. In fact, they are opening and closing pull requests by looking again at this query breakdown of the actions involved around pull request events. But when you think about what might be happening in your own project, remember that this is looking at all of the GitHub activity across this time frame. And that might not make sense for context. Each project decides to use these various tools or automation in their own fashion and to align to their own processes. For example, next. If we look at the Kubernetes project, and here we're looking at the Kubernetes repository within the broader Kubernetes project, and we run the same query to look at pull request events generated by bot actors, we can see that there are primarily just closing pull requests. They're not opening them. So if you think about metrics you might be creating about pull requests and look at these two different examples, then we have to choose how we either filter in or out bot actors, and how that's going to impact the metrics that we look at, say the number of open pull requests that are being generated by people or closed by bots. And depending again on what you're measuring, this can really change the outcome. So a reminder to acknowledge how your organization or community is using automation and how that automation might be being logged and collected in your current metrics processes. Next slide. So again, looking at pull requests across the broader GitHub ecosystem. Next. Just to give you a sense of scale, we found more than 70 million pull request events attributed to bot actors, which represents more than 50% of all pull request events on the platform. So there's a lot of this happening, and it could be happening in your project, whether or not you recognize it. And you might think, okay, if I know who the bot actors are, I know what their logins are, I can filter them in and out, or I know who the humans are, I can filter them in or out. And this is a popular method that is approached by many projects, organizations, and communities. But can we assume that activity coming from human-based accounts is truly driven by those humans? I'd say maybe. And if we click in the next build, here we're looking at the top 20 actors by pull request events. And you can see that the top 4 are clearly bots: Dependabot, Renovate bots, captions. The number 5 could be a person. I decided to redact these individual logins to protect individuals' privacies, but I couldn't confirm that these were in fact bots or people. And so, yes, there are a number of bots, but there's also a number of people. And if you look at the scale of activity that's happening between the number 4 and the number 6, it makes it highly unlikely that that number 5 individual is spending all of this time on their keyboard generating these events. It's most likely happening at the scale of a script. And anecdotally, I actually recognize the name of this handle and have interacted with this individual and confirmed that they are in fact using automation from a number of their accounts on GitHub. Next slide. So in summary, when I think about how we measure activity around our open source projects, I've been wrestling with this problem, specifically around how we can attribute work and associate work with individuals. We want to give people credit and recognize them for all the time they spend on our projects, but also that all events logged are not equal. Clearly, they could be coming from someone's 4 hours spent on their keyboard or some script they wrote 4 months ago. So as a general reminder, take a look at how your organization or community is using automation. What tools are you using? What processes have you set up? And ensure that you have a way to identify this within your data, or else you're just going to have a lot of noise, and it's going to get increasingly challenging to separate these two things. And that's the end of my data story, so I'm going to pass it on to Maria for the next tale.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maria. Next slide, please. So I'm a program manager in the Google Open Source Programs Office, and while I have mostly focused on communication and outreach, in all of these roles, I have used data to support my work, including in my role as a mom. Next slide, please. And I'm here to share my data tale from the past, specifically a job I had 10 years ago in Buenos Aires. Next slide. So back then, I was the product manager for a project to build an online shopping experience for Avicar, a boutique grocery shop that had several storefronts in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Avicar as a brand was not the looks per se, but it had a sense of quality associated to its name. You were paying more, but the quality was worth it, and also the experience of buying there was worth it as well. So the online shopping experience was seen as a luxury accommodation. It's also important to remember that this was 10 years ago, and only big chain supermarkets like Carrefour had online shopping available. And most people in Buenos Aires didn't trust it. Next slide. So the agency that I worked for that was leading this project was called Uplifted. And it took care of web development, design, and marketing. We built everything from the ground up, including product pictures like the one you see on this slide. It was all American expats living in Buenos Aires. And when they started to test the product, something wasn't quite clicking. I joined the project as a PM, but my role could also have been the Argentinian who's going to help us figure out what is missing in translation. Next slide. As it turns out, the owner of Avicar, Mariano, had a very specific vision. He wanted to launch the online shopping experience in Puerto Madero. That is a very exclusive neighborhood in Buenos Aires, and this was in order to build on this concept of luxury associated with the brand, or that he wanted associated with the brand. The issue was that the few people that lived in Puerto Madero full time at the time, and the majority of Avicar shoppers in the neighborhood were going there to work. So they were only interested in buying a sandwich for lunch. Next slide. So here comes the data. To make the product work, we needed to reach the shoppers that wanted to buy more products and spend more money in Avicar. As a PM for this product, I wanted to gather some data that could illuminate our way forward. And so to produce this, I created a simple interview protocol to talk to store managers across the city of Buenos Aires. I created a sample. I called 15 out of 40 stores in the city, and I asked them about shopping habits, including hours, length of receipt, and average amount of money spent. I summarized the results, and I told Withers, the owner of the agency, that the best chances of this new product succeeding was to try it in Palermo. Specifically, in the red cross that you see in the slide, which is the intersection of Scalabrini Ortiz and Nicaragua. But I guess Palermo didn't have the same connotation as Puerto Madero. It's hip, but it's not luxurious. So this is how you lose her. By the way, this is the title of a book that I really like by Junot Diaz, a Dominican-American writer. So as you can guess already, the online store was not successful after all. I think that if there is one takeaway in this story, other than you should base your innovation planning on reliable data, is that if you're going to change things for your users, you have to make it convenient for them and make their life easier. And changing habits is really hard, but we all do it for the right reasons. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Amanda, who will share the final data tale for this session.
Thanks, Maria. So hello, I'm Amanda. I'll also give you a quick introduction for myself. So I'm a pale white woman who wears glasses. I'm a researcher and engineer in the Google Open Source Programs Office. I'm also co-lead for Project Ocean and across external faculty at the Vermont Complex Systems Center. I do a few other things. I'm also a queer, very proud mama of 2 small humans, a U.S. Navy veteran, and I'm lucky enough to live in Vermont in the United States. So to wrap up our tales today, I'm also going to drop back into my first job as a professional data scientist, where I worked at a consulting firm outside of Seattle. And I worked on pretty much any project they could squint at and say, yeah, that involves data. You should be involved in this. So at the time, everybody was very excited about data science and big data. And there were things like sentiment analysis that were coming into view that were going to solve all kinds of problems and questions. And it was interesting at the time that consulting wasn't really flagged for me as a way to get into data science. I think a lot of folks at the time were working on products or moving into some of the bigger companies. But that wasn't how I got involved. I got involved as what is now known as full stack data science, where people would hand you a pile of things to figure out, and then you would slowly pick it apart piece by piece and then do all the steps for yourself. So the benefit of consulting was that I worked on a lot of different kinds of technology on a lot of different problems, and they were very interesting problems. And like Maria, this goes back to 2013 and working with a global brand to understand what people were saying about their product. So I was very excited to work with this brand and understand some of the new technologies that I hadn't worked with yet. My consulting company had a product in-house that they were using for large-scale data collection, doing data analysis and sentiment analysis. It was actually fairly forward at the time for a lot of the projects that were happening at production at scale. And it was fun to build up those different skills. So working on this project with this specific global brand, I was interested to see also in the kind of things they wanted to learn about. I will say that they did find things out and they were surprised what they found. So the customer I worked with did have the very real problem of quality control and recalls. So they had an infant formula, which they produced, distributed, and it was consumed by a global consumer base. This is a highly regulated space. They wanted to make sure that they could try out a new signal to track any potential quality issues, social media. The idea at the time was that social media was the new emerging space that people were having all of their conversations in, and that this would be a reliable way to do alerting around customer dissatisfaction. So at the time, this did work for things like if there was a flight delay, some of the airlines could start to see when people got grumpy, and then they talked and complained about it on places that had social media conversations. And so it was seen as this new collective way to be able to gain and understand what was happening with your customers. And while that was true for things like flight delays, at the time, it was not exactly the thing that you wanted to be using for this specific use case. So that was our problem number one. The hypothesis was that we would get an early signal for a recall for the product that impacted highly vulnerable populations, and it would be one more marker to help them understand that they needed to initiate a recall across infant formula. Now, big data, like I said, big data and sentiment analysis honestly would land you just about any product marketing contract in 2013 because people wanted it to solve all of the problems that they had. And this is where I first learned as a data scientist about the concept of solution mismatch. So at the time, in 2013, both social media and sentiment analysis and production pipelines were honestly not far enough evolved for alerting. And that wasn't the problem of the platforms themselves. It was just not necessarily one, the reliable sense for that. And it was also not what it was it was going to solve that problem. The second part of that is why it wasn't going to solve that problem. So this is a classic data analysis challenge, and that's even just finding what you want from the volumes that you don't. So the analysis in the proposal was honestly just flawed from the beginning. When people have an emergency impacting their child, they don't go to social media to complain about it. They go to emergency services. So that early signal that this company was looking for was not going to show up in these places until either like well after the fact that something happened, which is what happens more now. But at the time, people weren't even using it for that purpose. So they were looking for social media to surface these conversations around when they should pay attention to a specific region or a specific group. But that wasn't what they were able to find. It was not the main topic of what was being talked about when you talked about infant formula in 2013 on social media. So what did people talk about when they talked about infant formula in social media in 2013? Well, they talk about what a lot of people talk about now when they talk about babies online. So chances are when you're online talking about babies, and usually now this infant formula brand, they're probably talking about poop. So our clients learned that their consumers compared their product more to what was happening with their end users than they did that they needed to signal a recall. They learned their brand perception about their global product was most strongly associated with poop. This came up very negative in our sentiment analysis because at the time, the embeddings and methods that we were using strongly associated anything to do with poop in the negative sense. So they also always got a very strong signal that their brand had a negative perception when it was honestly just a lot of parents talking about their kids and the things that they normally talk about when they get together. And you have this new human that you're looking at who creates things that you're trying to figure out. So it wasn't anything that was truly negative. It was just a normal social pattern that was happening in a social space, but it wasn't what they were looking for, and it wasn't getting them closer to what they wanted to understand. So how does this translate towards new data scientist lessons learned? There were a few things I learned from that project that really have been very valuable for me for every data center project moving forward. The first is that just because your client asks for something, it's not necessarily what they want or need. So really identifying the problem they are trying to solve and what they want to have and what success looks like at the end is super important for moving them forward, regardless of the data that you're working with. And part of your job is to be able to say, after you've done some work, I hear that's what you want. You're not going to get there this way. And here's why. So not just telling them why things are not working well or why the data is not taking them where they want to go, but offering up either alternatives or different paths forward so they can get to where they want to go, or telling them this isn't just going to work in the time frame in the way that you allow. Also, because it's an available data source, it doesn't make it the right data source. So just because something is a group of data that is easy for you to pick up, that doesn't mean it's also going to be the right information that's going to lead you to the place you want it to be. I think Maria found out some really interesting things around trying to get to the way that her customer wanted to be working, but also they didn't like that outcome either. Sophia talked about that as well as here's the thing you may want to be measuring, but sorting it out is going to give you a bucket of things that are also really hard and maybe not true. And finally, When it is the main centroid, when it's the main topic that's happening, it's no longer an edge case. So just because you want it to be the thing that people are not having conversations about, that doesn't mean that's what they're going to be talking about. And so we want to make sure we're wrapping this up and leaving time for questions. We just want to really encourage everyone here to keep asking yourself and each other hard questions about how you design problems, what data you collect, the conclusions you draw from those, because these are large ecosystems, right? Data is actually a representation of people, technology, and ideas, and it's all fairly messy, but we're all here together, and we're all here to work together and help each other out. So thank you very much, and we will stay online for 4 more questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we're happy to answer them. And thank you for the claps. Oh, you're welcome, Luca. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, we had one pop up. So someone just asked, when it comes to presenting alternatives, is there a strategy you tend to follow? Because sometimes it's hard to convince people even when the data is there. Maria, would you like to start with that? Or would you like, or Sophia?
I can take a stab at this. I don't think I have the response because yeah, it's not always successful. But I think data, just presenting the data and presenting your reasoning behind it and why you think you should listen to that is what has worked with me when I had to do that in the past. It doesn't always work because sometimes people are really attached to an idea, but usually presenting your reasoning and allowing other people to see your thinking process is good.
Sophia?
Yeah, I would plus one that because I feel like it's all about the story. What generally needs a story around it, and as the presenter who's sharing the data, I think you have an opportunity to get people to see how you see it, how you're interpreting it. But if you have a strong story that, as Maria mentioned, is informed through solid reasoning and a logical progression, hopefully you could convince them otherwise. But I do think that is generally a hard problem. Amanda?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to understanding what is the we have a conversation a lot in our team about outcomes versus outputs. And a lot of metrics are really measuring outputs, but really you need to get to the next step to understand the outcome. So I feel like that can be associated emotionally, where someone has a specific outcome that they're emotionally tied to, like the concept of luxury and making sure that that's the association. It can also be they have a very specific outcome that they're associated with around things like economic modeling that they're doing as a part of their business. So I think it's making sure you're aligning and understanding like where the friction is coming from on why they don't want to pivot to a new kind of strategy or alternative. What are those barriers they're presenting as a part of that? And is there an emotional component, or is that tied into something else that's the outcome that they're driving towards? I think we have time for exactly one more. I'm going to go actually quickly to Han Kim. So there was a question of, is there analysis of the open source project activity available online and other sources available for this type of information?
I'll take that one. And I'd say there's many. They're not all reliable sources, but I like to start with where are all of the activities happening around your project, but acknowledging that there's going to be a lot of gaps in that information. So if you want to do something truly comprehensive, you're probably also going to pair it with going out and talking to people and running surveys and trying to fill the holes for individuals' experiences, as well as how their behavior is reflected inside a data source like or Discourse or Stack Overflow or all these other places that your community is active. Amanda, I know you've worked a lot with this as well. I want to pass it to you.
Yeah, I think our team tends to share our work as well on opensource.google, which we share in the beginning, and we do some reports on there. So if you're interested in following along with that, you can find that as well from us there. And I'm really sorry we have to go because we have to let the next session start. So thank you everyone who joined us today. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to chat with you more, and we'll try to catch up with you on Discord if we didn't catch you today. Thank you.